My girlfriend mocked my height and slept with the CEO's son in our bed, then demanded I raise her baby because I was safe and useful, and said I shouldn't complain since I was never her type anyway. I was always aware of my physical limitations. Since I was a child, I heard comments that mocked my height or how unattractive my face was. I remember my schoolmates looking at me with scorn when the teacher asked us to form lines according to our height. I, without fail, was always in the shortest section, hearing giggles, whispers, and jokes that mentioned how easy it would be to get lost in a crowd. To this was added a face that, according to them, did not attract anyone's attention. Common features: nothing of a square jaw worthy of a model nor bright and seductive eyes. I was simply me, a rather nondescript boy who wished to go unnoticed. In my early years, this made me extremely self-conscious. I resigned myself to the idea that it would be hard for me to approach the girls I liked, and most of the time, I hid behind self-defense jokes or avoided any opportunity to flirt so as not to be rejected. But over time, I realized that there was another facet of me that was extremely valuable: my intelligence. Since school, teachers noticed how quickly I learned and my ease in solving mathematical problems, understanding complicated readings, or formulating clear arguments. It did not matter if I was not attractive in the conventional sense, at least I had the ability to stand out academically. I learned to take refuge in books, in the curiosity that all kinds of knowledge awakened in me, and I polished my mind as if it were a secret weapon. While the popular boys paraded their charisma and appearance before the girls, I locked myself in the library to study, to solve equations, or to devise projects that would allow me to escape the routine life of my hometown. That silent discipline allowed me, over the years, to become an outstanding student and, later, to get scholarships to university. That is how I climbed. I did not need to steal glances with my physical presence if I could make people take me seriously for my brain and my determination. I got my first formal job in a technology company right after finishing my degree. I started as a data analyst, a position that allowed me to showcase my ability with numbers and systems. Even so, in meetings, insidious comments always appeared when they saw me in person for the first time. My colleagues would say in a low voice, thinking I could not hear them, that I did not have the look of the typical successful professional, but when they saw the results of my work, they changed their tone. Although there was always someone who would throw in, with a hint of mockery, "It does not matter how he looks, with the head he has, he will go far." And in part, I did. Years passed. I trained. I was promoted to positions of responsibility, and little by little, I gathered enough experience to jump to larger corporations, always in fields related to data, strategic planning, or the management of software and finance teams. I became that professional that companies wanted to hire for ambitious projects. What started as a simple analyst transformed into a director capable of making critical decisions. Still, in my late 30s, I did not stand out physically, and I had already accepted the idea that appearance was not my strong suit. My social life was not too exciting. I had dated a few women, but honestly, I never managed to establish a serious relationship. The idea of opening up too much and being rejected for my appearance terrified me. Yes, I had a couple of relationships, but they ended up breaking down due to a lack of emotional connection or the mistrust that accompanied me. I preferred, in my heart of hearts, to lock myself in the security of my work and the respect I was shown there for my intellect, rather than expose myself to rejection or mockery in the sentimental sphere. However, one day everything changed. I attended an event for the company I worked for, a recognition dinner for senior managers at one of the most luxurious restaurants in the city. There, after the official meal ended and when many were starting to leave, I decided to stay a little longer at the bar to have a coffee and mentally review the day's matters. Suddenly, the restaurant door opened and a woman entered who, at first glance, broke with any definition of beauty one could have in mind. She was tall, blonde, with light eyes, a sculptural figure, and features so harmonious that she looked like she was taken from a magazine cover. The atmosphere was permeated with her presence. I immediately noticed that the men turned their heads towards her with admiration, and the few women present looked at her with some envy. It was inevitable to look at her, and, in doing so, I felt a knot in my stomach. She was like that kind of woman who, in theory, would never notice someone like me. Surely, any man in the place would have approached her if he had the slightest opportunity. In fact, I saw her settle at a table and order a glass of wine. For several minutes, I watched her discreetly, trying to convince myself that it was useless to approach, but something pushed me to do it. Perhaps a wave of irrational courage, or simply being fed up with always living in fear of my appearance. I left my coffee half finished, got up, and walked to her table. She looked up with a somewhat haughty gesture, perhaps expecting to see the typical heartthrob who would ask her out with some cliché phrase. But she found me, a subject under 1.70 meters, with common features, wearing a suit that, despite being expensive, did not look good on my non-athletic figure. She looked at me without much interest and said, "Yes?" I felt an instant blush, but I did not back down. I asked her if I could sit down, if she was not waiting for anyone. She answered with a certain disdain that she had the night off. I took a chance and sat down next to her, calling the waiter to order a glass of wine similar to hers. That is how it all began. At first, she maintained a reserved attitude, perhaps wondering what a man of my appearance was doing trying to strike up a conversation with her. However, I brought out my conversational skills. I asked her about her tastes, her favorite movies, her profession, which turned out to be something related to fashion. When I told her that I worked in the corporate world and managed projects of great relevance, I piqued her curiosity. I told her funny anecdotes from some meetings and work trips, and I also showed a subtle humor, commenting on certain picturesque situations I had experienced. Little by little, she began to laugh, she relaxed, and even shed some of that distant air. The conversation flowed for hours, until the restaurant lights began to dim, signaling closing time. Without thinking twice, I proposed extending the night at another place, perhaps a nearby bar. I was surprised when she accepted. We walked a bit on the sidewalk, joking about how late it was and how difficult it would be to find another place open. Finally, we found a bar that closed late and ordered something light to eat along with a couple of drinks. We continued the conversation, increasingly comfortable. My mind could not believe what was happening. It was like a dream to feel that connection with such a dazzling woman and, at the same time, to discover that we had topics of conversation that made us both laugh. At the end of that night, I walked her to her taxi and dared to ask for her phone number. She, with a half smile, gave me a piece of paper with her digits and said, "Call me. I had a good time." I stood there static, feeling a euphoria I did not remember having experienced before. So I watched her leave and went back to my apartment, wondering if that had really happened. The following weeks were a succession of dates, phone conversations that lasted until the early morning, dinners, and walks where I discovered more about her life. Her name was Natalia. According to what she told me, she had modeled for a while and worked on some small runways. Currently, she was dedicated to promoting brands at exclusive events. Her daily life revolved around meetings with designers, fashion presentations, and encounters with very superficial people, as she herself admitted. What surprised me most was that, within her environment, she seemed like an unattainable goddess, and yet, there she was, giving me some of her time. She insisted that she was fascinated by the way I spoke, how interesting she found the business world, something she had not explored. It is true that I noticed a certain condescension at times, as if she marveled that someone like me, of average appearance or less, could have a managerial position and lead such a solvent life. But in those days of incipient romanticism, I did not take it as something negative. Soon the time came to make it official, at least from my perspective. In a particularly emotional encounter at an expensive restaurant, where I reserved a table with candles and soft music, I asked Natalia to be my official partner. She was delighted and accepted, which filled me with joy. Suddenly, I found myself introducing her to my closest colleagues and friends. Every time she appeared by my side, the effect I had imagined occurred. Everyone turned to look with admiration or astonishment. They asked me how I had managed to win over someone so out of my league. I confessed that this fed my ego in a way I had never experienced. It made me feel like a winner, a guy who did not need to look like a model to be with a stunning woman. I could not deny that this influenced my decision to move forward, as it gave me a different status, and she, for her part, seemed to like the fact that in my professional field I was someone important, with an influential position and good income to afford luxuries she craved. However, as the months went by, unsettling details began to surface. Natalia made comments about my height, about my build, about how funny I looked in certain types of clothes. She said it with laughter, as if it were a joke, but something in her tone was hurtful to me. At first, I let it pass because I was in love, hypnotized by her presence and the affection she showed me in other ways. Besides, she compensated for those jabs with displays of affection and by apologizing if I was upset. So the routine continued. I became more and more dependent on her approval. She often became capricious, requesting expensive gifts, weekend trips to luxurious destinations, dinners at very expensive places. My bank account held up, and I let myself be carried away, believing I was doing it for love. I told myself that, after all, I could afford it thanks to my high salary. And if that made her happy, there was no problem. A day came when the company organized a high-profile meeting for the directors and their companions. I decided to attend with Natalia, proud to introduce her to my superiors. At the cocktail party, everyone was delighted with her. They saw her as so beautiful and stunning that I was showered with congratulations and comments like, "Wow, you had an ace up your sleeve. You surprised us with this wonderful companion." It was impossible not to feel a stinging vanity, until I realized that, in a corner of the room, Natalia was talking with one of the new corporate officers, a tall, athletic young man with perfect features, the son of one of the company's owners. His name was Matthias. It was rumored that he had the position in the company basically due to his father's nepotism, but that he was also very ambitious. I saw him approach Natalia, and while I was talking with other executives, I noticed them laughing together. Out of the corner of my eye, I watched as he leaned towards her with confidence, placing a hand on the wall near her head in a seductive pose. I tried to maintain my composure, but I felt a pang of jealousy and unease. As soon as I had a free moment, I approached with a forced smile and greeted Matthias. He looked at me condescendingly, with that attitude of, I am younger, more handsome, and heir to the company. There was something in the way he looked at me that made me uncomfortable. I asked Natalia if everything was all right. She let out a small laugh and replied, "Of course, honey, we were talking about fashion, and he was telling me about some vacation plans he has." Matthias said goodbye with a "See you, gorgeous," addressing her without barely looking at me. Obviously, he was not a man who felt respect for me. I downplayed its importance for the moment, even if an alarm started to grow inside me. Upon arriving home, I spoke with Natalia about my jealousy and asked her if Matthias had made her uncomfortable in any way. She looked at me with annoyance and retorted that no, I was exaggerating, that I had left her alone for a good while I chatted with the bosses. What did you want? That I stay in a corner without talking to anyone? It was your fault for not paying attention, she snapped with a coldness that threw me off. But I, in my role as a man hopelessly attracted, ended up apologizing and accepting that maybe I had stepped away for too long during the evening. Things continued on a worrying course. Natalia changed the way she treated me. She became increasingly disdainful. She gave me nicknames that alluded to my short stature. She insinuated that I did not have a sufficiently imposing masculine physique. At the same time, she demanded more attention from me, more money for her expenses. If I refused, she would get furious. She would accuse me of being cheap, of wanting to make her feel less, and I would end up giving in so as not to lose her supposed affection. I began to suspect that she was not being sincere, especially when she started disappearing for several hours and did not even respond to my messages. Some nights she would arrive late, saying she had been with her friends at some party or event, and she would show a cold, unaffectionate attitude. My insecurity grew. I remembered my childhood, the teasing from my classmates, the girls who rejected my dance invitations with hurtful comments, and now it seemed that the past was returning to humiliate me again. But in my mind, I was afraid to face reality. The days passed, and the situation became unbearable, although I continued to deny the truth, until one day I arrived at my apartment, where Natalia had moved in a few months earlier, and I noticed something strange. It was 9 in the evening. I returned earlier than usual because the meeting at the office had been canceled. I opened the door and heard unusual noises coming from the bedroom. My heart accelerated. I walked in silence, trembling, and I found the scene I had secretly feared. Natalia was in my bed with Matthias, that young corporate officer. I was paralyzed, not knowing what to say. My first reaction was to be stunned, almost in shock, unable to scream or make a scene, as would perhaps have been normal. I simply stepped back a little and sat on the living room sofa, feeling my chest tighten. Matthias, with a cynical attitude, dressed calmly, gave me a mocking look and left without bothering to apologize. After a few minutes, Natalia, wrapped in a silk robe, approached me with an expression that was a mix of annoyed and defiant. She said, "You have realized, right? Well, that is how things are. I am not going to stop seeing Matthias. He is a man who attracts me and with whom I enjoy myself physically much more than with you. But I do not want to break up with you because I also get other benefits. You give me economic stability and a certain status in your executive circles, understood?" I swallowed hard. My mind could not process what I was hearing. She continued, "Look at you. You do not even complain. You know you do not meet the physical standards for someone like me. Who are you trying to fool? You have the advantage of money, intelligence, but even that is not enough to keep me in the intimate sphere. So get used to the idea. I want to stay here, take advantage of what you offer me, and do not come to me with jealousy scenes, because I am not going to give up Matthias." I was speechless, broken inside, and she ended the discussion with "I am going to sleep. Do whatever you want tonight." The image of my childhood stuck in my head, the mockery, the humiliation for my physique, the loneliness. I saw myself there, nullified, with a lump in my throat, and tears flowed uncontrollably. I stayed on the sofa all night, crying. When it was dawning, I left without saying goodbye. I went to the office so as not to run into her. The prospect of facing her made me nauseous. On the way, driving, painful memories of every rejection, of every taunt, flooded my mind, all concentrated in those last hours. I thought about quitting the company, disappearing, running away. But when I arrived at the corporate building, I met Matthias's sneering gaze in the hallways. The guy gave me a smug smile, sure that I would do nothing. That, curiously, awakened something in me, rage, wounded dignity. I knew in that instant that I would not allow any more humiliation, that I would not stand by with my arms crossed. Suddenly, I felt an impulse to fight, not physically, but with the weapons I mastered best, my brain. I had a friend in the software department, an engineer who controlled many of the internal systems, emails, and databases of the company. His name was Ricardo. He could not stand Matthias for his arrogance, and for the way he sometimes assigned him tasks dismissively. I vaguely told him that I needed to know if Matthias was doing something shady within the corporation, and I asked him to check if there were any suspicious emails or records. Ricardo, with a glint of complicity, agreed without hesitation. He told me he would snoop around the cloud backups because he suspected that Matthias deleted certain strange communications. At the same time, I distanced myself from Natalia. At home, I adopted a routine of arriving late, of sleeping in a small guest room that we barely used to store things. She did not bother to pretend she loved me either. She just went out and came back whenever she pleased. Even the doorman of the building told me that he often saw Matthias entering at night. I was not surprised. I just nodded with a sour expression. Internally, I was feeding my plan. I wanted to discover something that would allow me to unmask that guy and, in the process, free myself from all the oppression that was suffocating me. A couple of weeks later, Ricardo called me to my office, excited. He said he had found pure gold, files of Matthias's emails, deleted from the inbox and the trash, that showed a series of very suspicious financial maneuvers. My friend could not believe what he was seeing. It seemed that Matthias was committing a huge fraud behind the backs of the board of directors and even his own father, who chaired the company. Apparently, he used his privileged position to redirect funds from certain projects to private accounts. Ricardo gave me all the emails and documents. I sat with him to review them in detail, and we confirmed that it was a serious case, enough for Matthias to face justice. I asked Ricardo to print everything and save it on a USB. That night, I locked myself in the office until dawn, cross-referencing data and information. My conclusion was clear. Matthias was a fraudster who, sooner or later, would ruin the company if action was not taken. I then contacted a colleague from the finance area, someone I trusted, to corroborate the bank movements mentioned in those emails. He, after reviewing the database, confirmed to me that there was a significant accounting gap that had no explanation. The board of directors had not noticed because Matthias handled the matter with a certain camouflage and because he had the moral protection of being the boss's son. My colleague got scared. He asked me if I planned to report him. I told him not to be afraid, that I was not going to implicate innocent employees, but that this could not continue. A month later, the quarterly board meeting arrived, where each area presented its progress report, and the presence of the president and his main advisors was also planned. I kept my discovery secret until that day, aware that it would be a bombshell. Matthias went first, as usual, showing a presentation with wonderful graphs and projections. The directors congratulated him. They said he was a prodigy, the natural successor to his father. It was my turn to present later. When my turn came, I began with the routine information from my department. But towards the end, I warned with a firm voice that I had to make an important announcement related to suspicious activities that affected the company's budget. I could see Matthias turn a little pale. The rest of the room tensed. Then, I turned on the screen and showed the emails, the transfers, the evidence of the fraud. A dead silence fell. Matthias's own father, the president, turned livid. He listened to me with a face full of shame. To top it off, I presented the exact figures, pointing out how much money had been diverted. When I finished, I closed the folder and said, "This is extremely serious. No one knew about these operations, but there is the evidence. I am sorry to bring such bad news, but my duty is to the company." There was a murmur in the room. The president stood up and took his son by the arm, taking him away to speak in private. The board of directors was in shock. Several executives agreed with me, assuring that Matthias's conduct was unacceptable and that, without a doubt, it warranted a formal investigation, possibly criminal charges. I, feigning serenity, put away my material, but inside I felt a mixture of relief and satisfaction. I had finally done something that, in passing, freed me from that personal humiliation. I had attacked Matthias with my best weapons, logic and evidence. After a few minutes, the president came out with his son, head down. He apologized, saying he needed time to analyze everything and left with him. They did not even return to the meeting. The board, dismayed, concluded that they should proceed with an audit and that it was very likely that lawsuits would be filed. They thanked me for my diligence and asked me to cooperate with the documentation. In the following days, it was a resounding triumph without needing to hit or scream. That afternoon, I went home with the certainty that Matthias would have to be held accountable and that I would probably see him face justice for his scam. When I arrived at my apartment, I found Natalia in the living room, sitting, with a frown. She told me coldly, "We need to talk." I took a deep breath, ready for whatever. She dropped the news on me. "I am pregnant." I stood motionless, not knowing how to react, until I added, "And are you sure it is mine?" She looked at me with an expression that was difficult to describe, perhaps of rage or bewilderment. I said, "Because honestly, you have been with Matthias for a long time. You have not even bothered to hide it." She stood up, raising her voice. "Well, I guess it does not matter whose it is. You are my official partner, so you have to accept it." I was frozen. Her argument was as absurd as it was cruel. I replied that I was not going to assume paternity for something that was not my responsibility, and then, I commented with sarcasm that I doubted Matthias would help her, as he was involved in a fraud, and would probably end up in jail or disappear to avoid it. Natalia staggered a bit, not knowing what to say. "What fraud? What are you talking about?" I told her coldly what I had revealed at the board meeting. She put her hands to her head, realizing that her lover had lost, in a single blow, all his power and influence. She begged me to do something, not to let Matthias fall into disgrace, to talk to the president to give him a chance, and to please, stay together, forming a family. That is when I exploded and I spoke to her with all the pent-up pain and fury. I told her that I knew perfectly well that I did not fit the beauty standards, that I did not need anyone to remind me, because I had heard it all my life. But I also yelled at her that this did not give her the right to humiliate me, to manipulate me with her physique, to despise my feelings, and to laugh at me by sleeping with Matthias in my own bed. That I was sick of people thinking they could trample on my dignity, just because I am not 1.90 meters tall or have the face of a famous actor. She begged me to calm down, but I did not stop. "Do you think you can come back now, crying, just because your Prince Charming sank? You are empty inside. The only thing that sustained you was your beauty, and one day, that beauty will go, and you will be left with nothing." I concluded by throwing her out of my house, telling her to get out and not come back or I would report her for trespassing, since the apartment was in my name. Natalia left in a fury, yelling that I would regret it, that I had not seen her last move. I felt, in that instant, strangely free, even with the pain of recognizing that all the love I thought I received was a lie or that I myself had been deceived. The following nights I slept better, without the tension of seeing her enter with her haughtiness and her disdain. I returned to my routine with determination. A few weeks later, my ex-girlfriend tried to sue me to force me to fulfill my fatherly obligations. However, my team of lawyers proved that, legally, there was no way to proceed without a DNA test. After some time, the baby was born, and when the test was done, the obvious was confirmed: I did not share its genes. Natalia was left with no arguments for her lawsuit. She sought me out again, crying, saying that Matthias had disappeared after the criminal investigation and that she was alone and could not support the baby. She begged me to help her, to remember our time together. I was blunt in my response that I was not interested in her situation, that she had chosen her path, and I was not going to bear consequences that were not mine. I closed the door in her face. The internal investigation against Matthias was carried out, and a scandal erupted in the company. His father, the president, had to temporarily retire in shame, and he faced legal charges with the evidence provided. There was a strong commotion on the board. I became, overnight, the person who had saved the company from a huge embezzlement. I received praise from all sides, as well as an increase in my responsibilities. Finally, they offered me to become a partner in the company with a minority but significant stake. It was a milestone in my career. Paradoxically, that promotion coincided with my most bitter moment on a sentimental level, but it gave me the strength to move forward. At the same time, I decided to take my own physical and emotional well-being more seriously. I joined a gym on the recommendation of a colleague who had been training for years. At first I felt uncomfortable, surrounded by athletic people, but I made an effort. I hired a personal trainer, followed his routines with discipline, and after a few months, I noticed changes. I did not become a giant or a model, but I did gain some muscle tone. I felt stronger, and my height or my features ceased to be my only visible trait. In addition, I adopted a healthier diet and learned to buy clothes that enhanced my strengths. I discovered, with pleasant surprise, that a good haircut and a suitable style could drastically improve my overall appearance. Above all, my confidence grew when I looked in the mirror. My professional progress was noticeable. Now I had the task of supervising several areas, and my name was mentioned in business newspapers as one of the new directors to watch. The board congratulated me on my loyalty to the company. Sometimes, at the cocktail parties where I had to represent the corporation, the time when I was terrified to talk to women came to my memory. I realized that now, although my physique was far from that of a heartthrob, I radiated a confidence that many people found attractive. I did not need a beauty trophy on my arm to feel valuable. I had learned, after the hard experience with Natalia, that appearances are just a fleeting wrapper and that I was not willing to sacrifice my dignity for a pretty face. Later, I learned that Matthias was still in a judicial process and that he would probably end up paying with jail time or a large financial compensation. Natalia, meanwhile, had moved to a less affluent neighborhood, where she lived with her baby and without real support. From time to time, someone would tell me that they had seen her, that she asked about me or hinted if I could lend her a hand. My answer was always the same: to leave me alone. I had nothing to talk to her about. I no longer felt resentment, but a kind of indifference. I had closed that chapter. Meanwhile, in the company, things changed quite a bit. A new president was appointed to replace Matthias's father, and part of the board was reformed with more rigorous people. I was given a larger office, a team of analysts, and a salary according to my new status as a minority partner. One day, upon seeing my name on the door, I remembered that boy who felt unable to hold a girl's gaze without blushing for fear of rejection, of that teenager who ran to the library so as not to see how the girls ignored him at the dances. I smiled to myself, confirming that if I had learned anything, it was that perseverance and intelligence can open doors impossible to imagine, but even more importantly, that personal dignity is not negotiated for a little attention or a fleeting pleasure. The specialized press recognized my work in saving the corporation from $1 million embezzlement. They did some interviews with me where, with modesty, I explained that my intention was never to seek fame, but to protect the interests of the company. My colleagues applauded me and no longer made hurtful comments about my appearance. I think that, in some way, I also looked different, with my head held high, proud of my achievements, and aware that no one would trample on me again. As the months passed, my life stabilized. I would get up early to train a little, check emails, attend meetings, promote new projects. I no longer needed to carry a trophy on my arm to impress others. If I met someone, it was on the basis of a more genuine treatment, without the pressure of believing that I had to pay a fortune to retain their affection. Of course, I still met superficial people who were surprised by my position or my success, seeing my appearance and thinking, he is the main partner of that area. Wow. But far from being offended, I did not care. I learned that I do not need to fit the stereotype to be capable, nor to earn respect with muscles or perfect features. However, I did maintain my discipline of personal care, because I like to feel healthy and project a neat and confident image. In the hallways of the company, from time to time, the murmur of what happened with Natalia would arise. Some said that she had cheated on me for a guy with money and a spectacular physique, and that she was later involved in scandals. Others asked me about Matthias and his whereabouts. I just answered that everyone bears their own consequences. I avoided the details. The official version was enough. The truth is that, in the long run, I began to realize that I did not have to take revenge anymore or gloat in the misfortune of others. Exposing the truth to the board was enough to vindicate my value and protect the company. The experience, despite being painful, taught me the lesson that one must have the courage to face humiliation, not to underestimate oneself or believe that one deserves mistreatment. My Sunday afternoons became a space of peace. I usually sit on the terrace of my apartment, now decorated in a minimalist style that reflects my taste for simplicity. I relax, I drink an iced tea, and I watch the sky. I think about the paths that led me here. There are days when a certain sadness still invades me when I remember the moments when, because of my appearance, I was hurt and belittled. But, at the same time, it fills me with pride to know that I did not give up, that ridicule did not define me, and that, today, I live with my head held high. I do not pretend to become an arrogant man, just someone who knows his worth and who does not tolerate being trampled on. If I will fall in love again, It may be, but no longer with the desperation of someone who thinks there will be no other chance, nor with the naivety of believing that I must give up my dignity to keep someone by my side. If I am to share my life, it will be with a person who loves me for who I am in my entirety, who values my intelligence and my ability to love, and does not focus on whether I am tall or short, handsome or ugly, or if I have a lot of money, and, of course, who respects my feelings. Now, with the lesson learned, I prefer to be alone than to allow myself to be used as a walking ATM. In my professional life, I trust in continuing to grow, perhaps investing in new projects, expanding my horizons. I feel that my life is just beginning, with experience under my belt and the weight of the taunts turned into inner strength. Today I look at my reflection in a mirror and I think, yes, this is me, with my flaws, my height, my common features, but I am not the same one who cried in silence longing for approval. I have cultivated a firm will that overcame contempt. Although I still do not belong on any beauty runway, I learned that true self-esteem is born from a deep acceptance of oneself, and that acceptance is what allows me to be who I am. The man who overcame mockery, who exposed a fraudster, and who knew how to set limits in an abusive relationship. I promised myself, from the moment I saw Natalia leave with her suitcases, that I would never again let anyone make me feel inferior or take away my dignity.